Again, thank you for being here. Look forward to speaking with you this evening on interviewing tips. Tonight's conversation is going to center on interviewing tips. And in a couple minutes, I'll kind of just go over what I hope to cover with you in the next like 45 minutes or so. I will let you know there is like a raging thunderstorm outside of my house, so I'm hopeful that I won't lose power, but just in case, that may be why my computer, all of a sudden I'm gone. So anyway, just thought I'd let you know that. So for those, if it's your first time, this is a weekly boot camp we're doing throughout the summer. This is the fourth session we're doing. And I'll kind of go over the schedule a little bit with you as well at the end. But just know it's an ongoing boot camp that we're doing throughout the summer. And just thank you for being here this evening. So go right in, kind of the outline for this evening, and feel free to chat in any questions that you have. So kind of one of the first things we're going to do is just generally, like, do you have any questions about interviewing? Like if you have an upcoming interview or something like that, I'd be happy to try to address, obviously your particular interviewing questions first. I want to make this really relevant for you. So be thinking of that, because I'm going to give you the opportunity to chat in any questions that you might have. I'm going to go over some kind of common interviewing questions as well, just so you can kind of get a sense of what to prepare for. Managing your nerves, that's kind of just a general thing with interviewing. It's nerves are going to be a factor, and I'll kind of go over some tips for working through that too. Some general research tools, so you can get more insider knowledge on the organization that you're potentially applying for. Also some tools for prepping and things like that. I don't really the last bullet, assignment. You don't necessarily have an assignment. I also use this very similar PowerPoint for a class I taught in the spring. But I will show you, if you wanted to use some of those tools, kind of what that could look like if you wanted to kind of do kind of homework on your own. So with that, I guess just kind of like generally, what questions do you have? If you have any, have you interviewed before? What do you feel like went well? Thinking back to maybe interviews you've had in the past, like anything you would do differently. And if you have any experience with either phone or video interviews, just curious if anyone has thoughts on any of that. Feel free to share. Let me see, I'll pull up the chat area just so you can see that. Oh, nope, that's not what I want to do. Come on. Look at that. Okay. Go back. Okay. So not seeing any questions that folks have. I guess just generally, when I work with students, some common things that kind of come up. I'll go back to the full screen. Usually folks will share, like, that in their first interview maybe didn't go as planned. I think as you get more experience with interviewing, it'll get easier. It never becomes completely easy, but it'll probably become easier with time. But we do have some tools that I can show you that can help maybe work out some of those kinks. Maybe if you haven't been interviewed in a while, or you do have any, you're really anxious. And I think that can also help you reflect on what maybe you would do differently. Because one of the tools I can show you, it's going to record you, and then you can see how you respond to questions and be like, oh, I don't, that doesn't sound good, or I would say this differently. Also talk about some phone and video interviews as well. I mean, generally, some of the feedback I've gotten from students in the past has been, for phone interviews, making sure you're in a location that your phone, if you're not using a landline phone, if you're using a cell phone, um, that you're in a spot where the signal isn't going to cut out. Maybe you test it out ahead of time. Um, just that it's going to be a good experience for the person on the other end. You're not going to sound muffled. They're not going to be saying, "Hey, I can't hear you." Like that's not what you want to have happen in an interview, as much as possible. I will share a personal story. I had to do a phone interview once I had a job at the time where I was traveling a lot, and my job pretty much was to be traveling during the day for work. I did have to do a phone interview in a car. Not ideal. I made it work. I would have certainly been more comfortable in like a office space or my home or something, but just I couldn't make it work. But I did test it out ahead of time, so at least I knew like in that location with the car, the interview was going to work. But those are just kind of things to think about. And then for video interviews, like that's going to be obviously at this time more and more common, certainly right now in this moment in time. And I think some things to kind of think through for that would be, they might tell you, oh, we use, you know, GoToMeeting, or we use Zoom, or we use Google Hangouts. If it's a video platform that you haven't used, I think you want to make sure, one, like you have it downloaded on the computer or device you're going to be using. You want to test it out maybe with someone in your household or someone, a friend or something ahead of time, just so you can kind of understand how it works and make sure you feel comfortable with it. And that the device that you're planning to use can work it well. That, that you'd hate to have the device you're planning to use not support the platform you need to be on. So those are just some general things you'll want to think out ahead of time. So one thing I kind of also wanted to bring to mind when you're talking about interviews is just generally kind of going over the interview process and kind of the method of interview. So I think I'm speaking in generalities. To a degree, the interview process depends a bit on the industry that you're applying for. And kind of it may look a little bit different from industry to industry, but generally, kind of just knowing what we see commonly, this is kind of a rough idea of the interview timeline. So our earlier sessions have talked a lot more about the application process, how to find jobs, how to create good application materials. Now we're kind of talking more what happens after you submit the application. So you're gonna submit your application, most likely online through their portal. You send the application, and then at some point in the future, you'd be contacted for what we would call like an interview screen. That duration, it kind of again depends on the industry. I think what's pretty standard is like 2 weeks or so. Some companies might be a little shorter, some might be a little bit longer, and that's just always something to kind of be mindful of. But then you'll be contacted for an interview screen. Usually, this would be the outreach would be you'd be contacted probably by email for this, maybe by phone. But you want to be sure whatever email or phone you put in the application, once you submit that, be checking that regularly. At least once a day, maybe more. Because when you get that call or you get that email, one of you get the call, hopefully you answer it. But I know there's a lot of spam and stuff these days, so I might see a number I don't recognize. I might let it go to voicemail, but be checking your voicemail, and be responding promptly. You ideally want to respond to either the email or the phone message as soon as you can. You don't want to miss out on the opportunity. So be checking for that. And then that first round screen would either be usually a phone or video interview. That somewhat depends on the company's standards and how they do things. Usually that would be 20 to 30 minutes. It's more of a kind of get to know you conversation. Not in the sense that you should take it not seriously, you definitely should, but it's not going to be long in time. It's probably going to be 5 to 8 questions. Good interviewers will tell you how many questions they're going to ask you, because then you can do the math in your head. Oh, they're giving me 20 minutes. I have 8 questions to answer. I shouldn't be taking probably more than 2 minutes to answer each question, to give them time to kind of tee up the next question as well. So those are things to be mindful of too, as you, especially in that phone interview, that shorter interview, is what is the time frame I have to answer questions? Because what you don't want to have happen is you ramble on for 10 minutes to answer one question and they had 8 to ask you. And then you're going to be rushed through all the rest. You might be thrown off, all that good stuff. So it's not what you want to have happen. If they don't give you a sense of how many questions you're going to be asked, again, I would kind of stick to that. Like, don't go more than 2 minutes to answer a question generally. Because you'll in this tool I'm going to show you, you can record yourself. You can listen to yourself. I think what's going to happen is if you listen to yourself for more than 2 minutes, you're going to be like, I'm losing interest. So that's just something to be mindful of. So the phone interview, usually they'll, 20 to 30 minutes. They'll usually give you 5 to 8 questions or so. They might give you the opportunity to ask 1 or 2 questions yourself. Definitely ask questions. Don't say that, oh, I'm good. Like, I don't have any questions. That can be off-putting to interviewers. It doesn't show that you might be really interested in the job, but if you don't have a question to ask, they might just think that you're not that interested. So have a question or 2 to ask. They could be really basic ones, like how would you describe the workplace culture here? Those types of questions. I have a list of good questions you can ask. I'll show you in a minute as well. Don't, especially in this interview, don't want to ask like how many vacation days will I get, or probably even I wouldn't even ask pay questions yet. This is just this first screen. What they're trying to do, just so you can kind of get an understanding, like what they're trying to do in this screening interview is probably take their pool from, maybe at this point they've narrowed down to 20 or 25 people, or maybe even just 10 people, and they're trying to narrow it down to like 3 or 4 people that they want to have a more in-depth interview with. So they're really trying, this is like a narrowing tool. They use your resume and your cover letter as the first narrowing tool, and they liked you enough to offer a phone interview or a video interview. And then the next stage is they're trying to narrow it down to who's going to have that longer interview that we can get to know a bit better. And then from that process, the next thing I would probably recommend is as soon as you have that first initial interview screen, try to email the contact you have a thank you. Within 24 hours, send them a thank you. Doesn't have to be long, 3 to 4 sentences. It was great learning about more about this such and such position. Thank you for the time and opportunity. Best of luck in the search process. Hope to hear from you soon. Don't be offended if they don't get back to you. They might not, but it's good to do that. It shows a little bit about your character. And definitely would recommend to email that, because decisions are made really fast, and if you mail something, by the time it gets to them, they may have already made decisions about who's moving on to the next thing. So that's just some things there. Then the next step, which I'm kind of right here now, is usually you're going to be, again, companies do things all a little bit differently, but oftentimes there's going to be like kind of a second round interview. So in this scenario, you're going to be contacted for a second round interview, probably through the same means that they contacted you for the first one. So it's going to be likely if they emailed you for the first one, they're probably going to email you for the second one. Or phone for the first, they're going to probably reach out by phone for the second to say, hey, we'd like to set up a time to do a second interview with you. I often get asked, like, how quick is the turnaround on that? Like, when they reach out, like, is it going to be a week from them that they want to interview me, or is it going to be like the next day? That might depend on how quickly they're looking to hire someone. I'd say on average, it's for the in-person interview, it might be more like they might give you a week lead time to kind of figure out traveling, if you have to travel there, that type of thing. Now, right now, I've been kind of saying like that longer interview, because usually the standard probably before this was to have an in-person interview for that. Right now, companies might not be doing in-person interviews, particularly if you have to travel far. They might be doing, probably at this point, if they did a phone interview for that first one, they're probably going to be more so to do a video interview for the second one. But this second round interview might be more video oriented in this point in time. This second round interview is probably going to be more in depth. You're probably going to meet with more than one set of people. So it might be that first set of people might be the recruiter or some human resource folks. The second, you also might work with some people, meet with some people who are on the team that you're going to work with. So they want to see how you're going to fit in with that team. And then you might also have more of like a one-on-one interview with like who your supervisor would be. So, it could be up to 3 or 4 groups of different people they might have you meet with. Could be less than that, but I've seen kind of everything in between. Sometimes these might be half a day interviews. Sometimes they might be, depending on the company, multi-day interviews. Again, that's really specific to the industry and the organization. Really, at this point, they've narrowed it down to people that they know can likely do the job, but they're trying to see who's going to fit our company culture the best, who do we feel stands out the most in good ways for us and what we're looking for. And at this point, they've probably narrowed things down to 3 to 5 applicants that they're investing more time, more resources to recruit. They're not going to probably bring 12 or 15 people to do this type of in-person interview if they're only going to hire one of you. Maybe that many if they're going to hire 3 or 4 of you, but probably not if they're only going to hire one of you. So I guess in this process, just know this is going to be a bit longer, more of your day or all of your day. And they're going to be kind of putting you through the paces a little bit to try to get a sense of, can you do the work we need you to do? And are you going to be a good fit for our organization? So certainly before both of these, but particularly before the second round interview, you want to be doing more research on the company, making it clear you've done your homework and you are honed in on your interview skills. And I'm going to show you some resources to help you with that in a moment. Usually the next step would be a reference check. Sometimes companies might do this in between the kind of the phone interview and the in-person interview. It's kind of dependent on how they do things. They might use that reference check to help narrow down as well. But most commonly, I kind of see that as right before they make a decision. And if you're in contact with your references, ideally they'd be letting you know, hey, I got reached out to by this company, and kind of ask them like, how did that go? Like, to give you a sense of things. Sometimes they will, sometimes they won't, but that can be helpful too. And then an offer will be made, and at that point, it's probably going to be they'll let you know like, hey, we'd like to offer you this job. And along with that, they're probably going to be talking about salary, potentially like benefits as well. And I'll kind of give a teaser out to next week's session as well. Next week's session is going to be all about understanding salary, understanding benefits, and negotiating, and learning how to negotiate as well. So kind of the last step of the interview process is the offer is made. If you have any questions as I'm going through, feel free to ask them. But that's kind of a 30,000-foot view of the interview process. So let's see. So common interview questions. In a moment, I'll click this, and it'll take us to our guidebook on interviewing that we have that's available online. But very common ones are going to be, tell me about yourself, or some variation of that. That's one to kind of really think through, because you could go and, sometimes interviewers will purposely leave that open-ended to kind of see, where do you go? And I would not recommend like starting with, in kindergarten, I did this, and you kind of want to focus that answer again, still trying to maintain it within 2 minutes. You don't have to tell them everything about yourself. I think you want to, again, kind of how we were thinking about talking about resumes, tell them the things about you that you feel like are going to be most relevant to the job. that you want to make sure that they know about you. Could be some of your educational background, could be some of the life experiences that you've had that you feel like make you stand out for this job. Um, but again, I would recommend focusing it to the things that are going to um, help you stand out for this job. And they may have some follow-up questions too. And this is usually a very early on interview question. Just tell me about yourself. What do you think I should know about you? Those types of things. But be pointed in that. And again, you don't have to tell them your whole life story. Kind of narrow it down to the nuts and bolts of what you feel like they need to know about you for the job at hand. Other very common ones would be some variation of strengths and weaknesses. Strengths, obviously, what do you think you bring to the job that makes you stand out? What makes you a good candidate? And some of these, a very common thing is, you might feel like you kind of answered it in another question. You still want to answer the question that they asked you. What you could say, as I was saying earlier, but to reiterate, here are some of the strengths that I feel like I would bring to the position. So you can acknowledge that you said something similar, but I would still answer the question. Because they may have a matrix that they're answering, for this question, we're going to give them a 5. They did a really good job. But if you don't answer the question or you say I answered it earlier, they might not remember what you said, and then they might only give you a 2. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind. Weaknesses, I would say with that, don't say you don't have any. We all have weaknesses. I don't know if any of you are fans of The Office. I'm a fan of The Office. And one of the times they're asking Michael Scott, they ask him, what are your weaknesses? Oh, I work too hard. I care too much. All these things that are really not weaknesses. I think you want to genuinely acknowledge a weakness about yourself, but you want to be thoughtful in the weakness that you choose to share. If they're asking, we are looking for someone who can do thing A, and you say your weakness is thing A, I'm not good at that, then that might raise some eyebrows. I think you want to acknowledge something that's maybe tangentially related to the job, and be pointed in that. I think really thoughtful in that. And you don't want to just say the weakness and leave it there. You want to say the weakness and then acknowledge how you're working on it. I recognize this is a weakness in myself, and here are some steps I'm taking to try to get better at that. I use an example for myself when I was interviewing for a job. I said, one of the things that I'm challenged with, or I find a challenge, is public speaking. But what I'm trying to do is I've put myself in situations where I've forced myself to do public speaking, and it's gotten better. I wouldn't say, and this is what I said in the interview, I wouldn't say I'm 100% great at it yet, but I've definitely made progress and I'm feeling better with it now. So you can kind of quantify how it's a weakness for you and how you're working on it. Another common question is why are you interested in this job? Why are you interested in this company? This is again where you want to have done some research on both the job and the company, and kind of talk about how you feel like it fits in with your career goals. Another common one is how you deal with conflict. Whether it's conflict with a supervisor, conflict with a customer or a client, conflict with someone who's at your same level, like a coworker, kind of thinking through how you would deal with that. Some safe ways to play that would be, if someone if you were having conflict with someone, acknowledging with them that you were upset, or kind of saying this is what's bothering me, but how can we work on it? I think first step, trying to deal with it on your own. But if you weren't able to, or you weren't getting a resolution, then trying to get help from either another colleague or a supervisor, and kind of working through it. I think you want to talk with them about the process of how you work through the conflict. That is what they're interested in. They're probably less so interested in what the conflict was about. They're more interested in, can you talk about the process of how you work through the conflict? Because what they want to see is, can you work through conflict? Because conflict is kind of just an ongoing thing in a workplace. But do you have the skills? Can you demonstrate to us the skills that you know how to work through it? So it's not going to be a problem. Conflict isn't going to surround you because you don't know how to deal with it. That's really what they're looking to see. Managing time, managing priorities is another thing. So again, really with all these questions, but it kind of just comes up for me now is you really want to try to speak as much as you can from your experience. And if that experience is in the classroom, great. If it's from work experience you've had in the past, great. But as much as you can, speak from experience. So again, like with thinking about managing time and priorities, that's a great opportunity to speak about experience. Like talk about whether it was in school, like you were managing the different classes that you had and did well, or maybe it's a combination of I was doing school and working. I had to really prioritize how I managed all those, but I was able to get good grades and maintain all my work as well. But those are things you want to think through, and they might want to know the process of like how you prioritize things. Like if you got three things going on at the same time, how do you know which to give priority to? How would you figure that out with us? Again, a lot of it's like trying to figure out how do you work through the process of these things. And that's why it's helpful to speak through examples, because then they can see how you've done it in the past. And, pick examples that show you uh, in a good light too. You can be selective of what you choose to share as an example, and I would encourage you to be, because you want to share examples that show you in a good light. And then I already talked about like what questions do you have for us? Always want to have some kind of questions, even if you feel like you already know the answer. Definitely want to ask those questions. And then in bold down here, I kind of have this thing like think about the stories you want to share about yourself. So really, for all of these and really all the interview questions you're going to get, right now is the time to start thinking about what is the narrative I want to share about myself. Like, what are the stories from my past that I want to think through and have in my mind before I go into an interview that are going to show me in a good light. Because what you don't want to have happen is you get asked a question, you haven't done any prep, you in your mind you have a good example, but it's going to take you some time to kind of think through that, and then in the interview you kind of just get it's just clear you're not prepared. You're having to pause and think through things a lot during the process. That's the what you don't want to have happen. You want to have kind of thought that through ahead of time, so when that question comes, you're like, oh yeah, like I know what I want to say to that. Now, does that mean you're going to be able to prepare for every question they're going to ask you? No, you don't know. You're never going to be able to prepare 100% for every like question in the exact way they're going to word it, but you want to have general themes of questions kind of prepared for, and that's where this guidebook can be helpful. um, this is actually available right on our website, and in a little bit I'll show you the resources, how you can access those resources right on our website. um, but this interviewing guidebook, uh, again, kind of has some general ideas to kind of think about, some general etiquette as well, which these are things I would encourage you to look at a little more in depth. For the sake of our time, I'm not going to go through all of these, but these are certainly some things to kind of keep in mind. Generally, kind of what to expect as well. And then here's kind of like the common interview questions section that we have here, a little more in depth than what I just did, but it is there. There are also some illegal interview questions, at least in the US too. So that's something else to keep in mind. So you should not be asked these types of questions. Um, and then I've been asked before, like, how do I handle this? Some interviewers, maybe they don't interview a lot. They might be a small company and they're not as well versed in what's legal and not. They should be, but they might not be. I've been asked before, like, if I was to be asked one of these questions, how should I respond? And in my way, there's a few. My thought, depending on who you are and how you want to go about it, there's a couple ways you could do it. Really, three. One is you just say, "I'm not going to answer that question." That's kind of, you just leave it there. I'm not going to answer that question. This is a legal question. I'm not going to answer it. Another way you could kind of come at it is, um, I'm not really sure how I see this fitting into like the scope of the job. Could you explain to me why you're asking this question? Um, and then they might be like, "Oh, I never really thought of that. Maybe this isn't. Maybe I shouldn't be asking this question." Um, and then the third way is like, I've talked to people who've done this before. Like, You could answer the question. That's kind of up to you. I mean, generally it's not that often that I work with students who have been asked these questions, but just in case you are, it's just something to be aware of. And, you know, we are here to help you if you feel like you're trying to navigate that too. Here's kind of a way to think about how to develop your questions too. How to develop your answers to questions. So it's just something else to kind of think about. Oh, and here's that what to ask. So here's some like questions to think about of here's what I could ask if I was asked a question. Or asked, do you have any questions? Here's some questions you could ask. All right, so here I kind of went over this as well. So those are the big things I wanted to cover in that. Managing nerves. So this comes up a lot as well. Nervous about an interview. Generally, I would say you should be. I'm kind of a Star Wars geek, so I actually pulled this like too.
I'm not afraid.
You will be. You will be.
So I bring that up mostly because, you know, Yoda's there telling Luke, like, you know, Luke's saying, I'm not scared. And I've worked with students before who like they're not scared for an interview. They tell me they're not scared for an interview or not nervous. I won't really say scared, but they're not nervous. And really, I would say I'm nervous for you if you're not nervous. Because you should be nervous going into an interview, but it's all how you channel that energy and channel in a positive way. So use that nervous energy to prep for the interview, as we've been talking about. Also, I think putting it into perspective, and this is a little challenging. So it's likely you're going to have hopefully many interviews. You know, you'll be going, you know, interviewing at a lot of places. But I think a muscle, if you will, to build is the muscle of, I hate to say it, but it's like the muscle of rejection. It's unlikely you're going to get offered every job you apply for. So the sooner you kind of get comfortable with that, I think in some ways it kind of eases the pressure a bit. It's like, you know, I might not get every job. And putting that into perspective. Still, you want to put your best self forward, but sometimes people will put a lot of pressure on themselves to the point where it's kind of they're not able to put their best selves forward because they're so nervous because they put so much pressure on the interview. And I guess what I'm encouraging you to try to do is put it in perspective. So hopefully there's not as much pressure on you in the interview. Act the part. So that kind of comes up with attire, timeliness, and follow-up. And with that, there's a helpful video I want to share with you. It's a couple minutes long. I did this to you last time. I'll get to it in a second. I just got to go through the Plattsburgh site to get to it. It's not recognizing that I'm a Plattsburgh student to get to the thing that I wanted to show you. Sorry about that. So the thing I'm showing you is actually a resource we have called Candid Career. And Candid Video. So this is the video I wanted to show you. I just gotta find it really quick. No, this is it. So here are some ideas, I guess, more on like what not to do in prepping for the interview.
Oh, jeez!
Hey, Bill Tompkins. I'm your 9 a.m.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'll be with you in just a moment.
I'll be here.
Mr. Tompkins, thank you for coming in. It's great to put a face to a name.
Sure, nice to meet you. How much does the job pay?
We'll get to that later.
Understood. How many vacation days do I have?
So how are you today, Mr. Tompkins?
Not good. I'm in a fight with my girlfriend. 10 minutes late for dinner, she's all over my case. And my dad, he's on my case too. I swear he thinks I'll never amount to anything. Everything I do, nothing is good enough for that man.
Okay, let's see your resume.
My resume. My resume.
So once you sign in, you'll go to the third floor and you'll get your assignments from Vicky, our secretary.
So I guess you could say I've done a lot of work on those platforms. I have pretty good experience. I also have a certification in Java and C++.
Oh, I see it says here you spent the last 3 years at Walters and Sullivan. So what makes you think you'd be a good fit here?
Well, I graduated with a degree in environmental science, and then I spent 5 years working at the Peace Corps. What I was trying to do was push legislation through Congress to stop these big oil companies. These big oil companies are killing our civilization.
You know we're an oil company, right?
This is Mr. Tompkins. Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
Oh, I see on your resume you used to work with John Mahoney.
John Mahoney, right. That guy has no clue how to run a company. I don't know who would ever put him in charge of anything.
He's my uncle. And with each bullet point, you just check it off.
Pleasure's all mine, Sandy.
Tamika.
Tamika, right.
Hi, this is Tamika Monroe from Consent and Release of Liability. I'm calling about Billy Tompkins. He listed you as a reference.
Never heard of him.
So basically, if you do everything opposite of what that guy did.
Candid Career presents the biggest interview mistakes. Number 1.
Yeah, basically, if you do everything the opposite of what Mr. Tompkins did, you'll be set. So I kind of wanted to show that because it kind of just quickly shows some things to not do. And it certainly helps you kind of reflect on how to act the part in an interview. So lastly, what I'm kind of going to leave you with today is some tools to use in the interviewing process. So the first one I want to show you, and you may have used it in other ways, but it's a tool called Glassdoor. So you can use this as a job search board, which it's great for. But you can also use this as a way, I'm just going to kind of think of a company real quick. This is the first one that came to my mind. You can also use it to do research on companies. So I could look at interview. If I click on interview and I click search, and it's not going to be for every company, but Glassdoor does have a pretty good kind of library of companies that it has information on. And what you can do here is I'm clicking on here and it's showing me, it has information on like quite a few Google interviews in New York City, and basically kind of walks through like, and you can see like these are people who either had an offer or didn't have an offer, kind of what their interview experience was like, to kind of walk you through like what the process was like, maybe some tips, that type of thing. I have found this to be helpful, and I know a lot of students have, so I would definitely encourage you to use this tool. I believe Indeed has something as well. I just think the Glassdoor one's a bit more robust because it's been around a bit longer. So I would definitely encourage you to take a look at that to do your research. Also, I would say following like the organization on LinkedIn, kind of checking out their online presence, checking out their website. That's also a helpful tool. Last week I talked about informational interviewing and how that could be useful. I'm not going to go kind of rehash all of how to set up an informational interview like I did last week, but it'd be, taking that informational interviewing that we had last week, taking that and trying to informational interview someone who works at the company you're wanting to work at would be great. That's one of the great ways networking can be helpful, and I would encourage you to think about that too. And then the last tool I want to show you is that the big interview I was mentioning before. Um, you can actually access this not here. Here, yep. So Big Interview actually lives right on our career tools under job postings and career tools. If you scroll down, there's Big Interview. This is also our guidebooks I was showing you before. Here's the job search guidebook. Oh, and today we're talking about interviewing. Here's the interviewing guidebook. But Big Interview, when you log in, looks like this. There's a few things you can do with it. If you go to the fast track, I'll just click start now for an example. It kind of walks you through like some of what I'm doing now and also more like interview prep as well. There are little modules you can kind of work. So the first one is kind of just a general introduction.
Hi, this is Pamela Skillings from Big.
So basically, Pamela walks you through kind of how to use this fast track and Big Interview. But then it kind of has some built-in, like, here's some best practices in interviewing. And then it has you do a practice question. And then it talks about the types of interviews. Then it has a question. It's pretty interactive. It kind of has like a 5-minute module that asks you some questions, see how you're doing. And you could spend a good amount of time kind of going through this. And I would encourage you to. It'll probably help calm your nerves going into interviews. You can also click on practice, and you can look at their practice interviews, which can be a great resource too. If you click the general, it's kind of more just general interviews, which you might find helpful. If you're applying to graduate school, they have a whole section on graduate programs. Kind of if you're looking for a government job, you can look here, kind of just by industry or skill set. The industry one's kind of cool. You could click on, like, if you're thinking for a job in the marketing field, click on marketing. And then you can kind of click on, okay, well, I'm maybe particularly interested in graphic design, or maybe I just want to do a general marketing interview. And then you can kind of pick your interview. They kind of give a quick synopsis of the type of interview you could have. If I click on it, it then is going to, oh, well, my webcam is being used by you all right now, so I can't necessarily start it. But basically, if it was available, it would show me, and I could click like start, and it would start, and then it would ask the question, start recording me, and then it kind of does that for each of the 8 questions, which you can watch then afterwards. So really, really helpful. Those are the kind of the main things I would recommend getting started with Big Interview on. You could certainly explore it. But they kind of have different curriculums as well that you can kind of look through as well. But that's kind of the main parts. So if anything, I think this is probably the most useful tool I would use to kind of get prepped for interviewing, would be Big Interview. It's a great resource. We just started using it about a year ago, and we've had good feedback from students about it as well. So I think that is everything I had this evening. Yeah. So what I'm happy to do, one, I guess I'll before I leave you, I will show you our upcoming events that we have over the summer. So under our special events page, we are here today, our job search bootcamp on interviewing. And then next week we will have our job search bootcamp on salary, benefits, and negotiation. And if you missed some of our earlier ones in July, we'll be restarting them and doing them all over again through August. So I would encourage you to take a look at those. You can also watch our previous events from the spring. We had a whole adulting series, and then we had some other events as well. They're all recorded, and I'm actually going to be working on making all of these recordings available too. So you'll be able to see them. So I'd encourage you to connect with us through upcoming events if you feel like they're going to be helpful for you. And you can also make an appointment with us for more individual help one-on-one. And you can do that right through our Make an Appointment tab, make an appointment with one of our counselors. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us tonight. I will hang out kind of here if you have any follow-up questions you want to ask me more one-on-one. But with that, that's kind of the end of the formal part of the evening. So thank you and have a good rest of your evening.